'tis accustomed with Prospero.
A bird of my tongue is better than a beast of yours.
The evil that men do lives after them.
What dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil.
Blood hath been shed, day and low.
Well, hello, everybody. How are you? Tony Estrella here. Welcome back to Brush Up Your Shakespeare. This is season 2. The pandemic has gone on longer than any of us wish. Season 2, episode 6. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to bring in a very special guest, Remo Airaldi, to talk to us about some, to further our education and our enjoyment, hopefully, of this, our favorite writer's work. Hope everybody's well out there. As always, I want to thank Navigant, Credit Union for their support of Brush Up Your Shakespeare, and the wizard behind the scenes, John Del Sesto, who is making sure everything looks good, sounds good, and it's out there. So hope this is getting to you, and you're you're in for a wonderful episode today. So without further ado, I want to talk about a special guest today, who is Remo, who is a friend, colleague, and one of the most recognized and excellent, wonderful actors in our region throughout New England. And I'm going to go a little through his bio, which is incredibly impressive. And so you can, for those of you who haven't seen Remo, many of you have. And when I start to kind of throw you some of his credits at you, you're going to go, oh, of course, because in his esteemed career, Remo has appeared in over 60 productions in his 25 years as a company member, of course, at the fabled American Repertory Theatre. So those of you who would, like me, would get up to Boston as much as you possibly could to see great theater, you've certainly seen Remo in so many productions, including, I think, the most recent one from a couple of years back was Night of the Iguana, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit, which with a very, very starry cast, including Remo. Cabaret, Oliver Twist, Island of Slaves, Waiting for Godot, Endgame, The Miser, The Seagull, The Winter's Tale, lots of Shakespeare as well, 6 Characters in Search of an Author, Pericles. I remember as an undergraduate student running up there to see him in 3 productions of Henry IV's Part 1 and 2 and Henry V, way back when. I don't even remember the year. So back sometime in the, 25 years ago or so now. An incredible production with Bill Camp, among others, and John Douglas Thompson, who was also on us a few episodes back. Other credits for Remo include many productions, as you have seen, and at the Commonwealth Shakespeare Company with our friends up there. Most recently, Cymbeline, which I was privileged to be a part of, and was the first time I got to collaborate and work with Remo, which was an incredible joy. And so many other productions, I think 9 in total, including Richard III, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. Taming of the Shrew, Love's Labour's Lost, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Twelfth Night, The Comedy of Errors, Coriolanus, and All's Well That Ends Well. He was also recently up at Speakeasy in Shakespeare in Love, which is not quite Shakespeare, but Shakespeare adjacent and certainly close enough. The stage version of that, Frankenstein, Hound of the Baskervilles. Like we were talking about this with Mariana last week, there's not a theater in New England that Remo hasn't appeared in. Many productions at many of them, including, of course, lots of productions at Lyric Stage, Boston Playwrights Theatre. We haven't gotten him down here to the GAM yet, but goodness knows we're going to be trying sometime in the future. We'll see. We'll keep our fingers crossed. And Remo, of course, has also worked all over, not only the country, but the world, including places like La Jolla Playhouse, Geffen Playhouse, Cirque Du Soleil. I want to talk about that. American Conservatory Theatre, Walnut Street Theatre, Actors Theatre of Louisville, the Moscow Art Theatre, and even the Taipei International Arts Festival. And beyond all of that, he is a lecturer in acting at Harvard. And not only Harvard, the regular, but Harvard, also the extension school and the summer school. He's always working. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my friend, yours, soon to be, if not now, Remo Airaldi.
Yay.
Hey, Remo, how are you?
Tony, how are you? Good.
Oh, my God. Well, it's so good to see you. And thank you for doing this.
Oh, my God, my pleasure. Please.
I just had someone, if you just heard a knock on the window, it's because, someone's trying to get in here and I'm going to avoid them. Recording live.
Go
The
for
private
it.
guy's going to get mad. He's going to break something. Angry person in the brown UPS.
Yeah. I didn't realize when I sent you my bio that you were going to read the whole thing.
Well, the reason why I wanted to
old.
is because it's incredibly impressive, and much of it I have, with some, especially the ART stuff that I have got to see as a student of acting, and this will lead to something here, because clearly beyond what your career here in our region, but across the country and the world, and there's you said something to me. We were talking last week, and you said, and I go through all that to say, what have you been doing for the past 10 months, right? Like, you said, I think this is by far the longest time, right, that you've gone between plays. So how has it been? How has the pandemic been treating you?
For sure. I mean, it's definitely been by far the longest time I've gone not acting in any way. And, it's horrible. You have your ups and downs. I'm sure. Listen, you can relate. You think, oh, it's fine. And then you realize how much a part of my life it is. I think I was telling you that I've been doing a lot of teaching, and obviously because I can't be on stage, I've been taking on more teaching projects. Right. And for the last couple of years, I thought to myself, well, I guess now I'm more of a teacher than an actor. And the only positive aspect of this horrible situation is that I realize that I'm not more of a teacher. I am an actor, and that is the essence of who I am. I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching, but the acting is really what's, deep in my heart. And so it's just been incredibly heartbreaking, And believe me, I'm not complaining. I'm so fortunate that I have the teaching. So many of my friends, who don't have that option are really struggling right now. I don't need to tell you. It's just a horrible situation, but I'm hoping, it seems like there's a light at the end of the tunnel right now. And Have
you got a vaccine yet?
No, I'm not 75 years old.
Yeah, I know, right. I thought maybe, you're at Harvard. I don't know if they have special connections.
No, yeah, really. Well, we're completely online at Harvard. So I think I think some of the schools that are in person might have some sort of vaccine protocol, but no, they've already told us that we're not going to be back in person until the fall. So I would imagine at some point, they'll set up some sort of protocol for that.
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but looking forward, then you do have something booked ahead with our fingers crossed, which is back with our friends over at Commonwealth, right? And what is that going to be?
Well, this was last year. We were supposed to do The Tempest on the Common, and that was an up and down sort of adventure. It seemed like we were going to do it, and we had gotten past that first wave, if you remember, and maybe, and of course it didn't happen. We did a version of it on Zoom with John Thompson,
right?
And we're hoping that this summer we will do a full-on live production on the Common. So fingers crossed that actually works out. It would be lovely to have that be the first thing.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Just thinking about that.
I'll have my blanket right down there.
That play, those words, and and of course that's my favorite thing to do in the world is be in front of 6,000 people every night saying these words. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I don't know if 6,000 might be too many. They might have some restrictions.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. There might be some.
They might start counting next year.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that brings up a point, a little inside baseball for those of you watching, in terms of, you might be asking, when is theater coming back? How is it coming back? And some of the challenges that we have are not, we're crossing our fingers that we will see some outdoor productions this summer, because of course that makes it that much more comfortable for an audience, and that the transmission of the disease, even no matter where we are in terms of vaccine at that point, a lot less dangerous, except for, of course, then there's the other side of the curtain, which is our side of the curtain, right? Which is even the more difficult thing, because it's difficult to do a play with social distancing. How do you keep the actors together and all of that stuff so protecting the actors is also a part of the challenge right now that companies are dealing with, and why it's so difficult to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, obviously, you said it. It's relatively easy in a lawn situation outside to spread people out. But as you know, inside baseball talk. But when we do these shows, there are 2 trailers that we're in, and the beauty of doing Shakespeare plays is that there are big casts.
Yeah.
Plays. And so we're pretty much crammed in there. And so, figuring that out is going to be quite a challenge. Any theater, really.
Yeah,
I mean, if you just have to think about it, 6 feet, maintaining 6 feet in a dressing room situation is really hard.
No,
But,
speaking of which, I mean, we shared a dressing room not even last summer, 2 summers ago now. It seems like last summer. Time has collapsed.
I know.
But when we were working on Cymbeline, and as wonderful a show, it was so fun to perform every night out there. I looked forward every night. There was about a 20-minute thing that you and I were the only ones in the dressing room in Act 1. And we could most of it was for me just listening to you get to tell stories. And I'd go, when you did that, can you tell me what happened? And when I saw you in this and this, and you would just kind of go.
It was so fun. It was so great. Hey, you told some great stories too, I have to say. So it was vice versa, my friend.
But one story, I know that, well, first of all, you're not native born to these parts. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Peru, and then I lived for a few years in Chile before we moved. I moved to the United States during my teen years. Yeah.
So English is not your first language, obviously.
No, not at all. I mean, when I came here, I knew some English, but it was definitely I was sort of thrown into school and basically learn English, So no, it's not at all my first language.
We're going to get to that in a minute because I want to talk about Shakespeare in other languages, which is really interesting. And we talk a lot about on these shows about the form of Shakespeare and how actors work with the form and how audiences can get kind of comfortable with the form.
Right.
And so we'll spend a little time. We'll certainly be talking about form today, but we're going to talk more about how the audience, of course, doesn't come to the theater to see form. They come to see content to get a story, right? Sure. So we'll talk about how those stories translate and why Shakespeare is so kind of beloved all over the world and not just in English-speaking countries. And using your example, because I found out one story you didn't tell me in the dressing room at Cymbeline was about when you go home to see family, that on occasion you have worked as an actor back home and done even telenovela, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because so yes, I haven't done theater elsewhere just because I don't have enough of a break to do productions. But I actually, many years ago at Harvard, where I teach, one of the fellows in one of the schools was the head of this network, television network, which creates all these telenovelas. And we started talking, and I said, I'm from Chile, I'm Peru, I speak Spanish. Oh, great. Maybe we could put you in certain things. And so, yes, sort of small little parts, usually a doctor, I was telling you. It's very funny because the first time I did one of these, he said to me afterwards, we're going to have to change this and reshoot it and just make you a doctor from the United States. I was a specialist in amnesia from Columbia University, I remember. And I said, well, why do we need to change it to an American guy? Because you have an American accent. And so I guess in the many years that I've been in the States, I've developed an American accent when I speak Spanish. But yes, indeed.
Certainly an American accent, though. But not a Boston one yet, which is good.
No.
You don't quite sound like a Kennedy or some pasty Irish guy from Manchester.
Yes, exactly. Well, I tried. I mean, that was a huge effort. To speaking of Shakespeare, the trepidation I had with working on Shakespeare as someone who felt a little bit inadequate about my English. And I certainly did have an accent early on that I had to get rid of. Luckily we're in a different place right now. But when I was coming up, if you had an accent, that limited the things that you could do. Right. And certainly Shakespeare,
that's been a great change, hasn't it? Because same thing with me, growing up, working class kid in Rhode Island, I had a, pretty pronounced, unbeknownst to me when I got to college, a pretty pronounced Rhode Island accent. And when teachers said, oh, you're going to, you need to work on these things. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? I don't have an accent. Like, and then you listen to yourself in terms of, and then you go, oh, okay. And so we work very hard as young actors, right, correcting these things in order to what the ideal used to be. What do they call it? Mid-Atlantic, right?
Right,
yeah.
right.
Somehow, like you not quite England, not quite American. We meet in the middle of the ocean. I never quite got what it meant, right?
Yeah, although sometimes there were those teachers, horrible teachers, I would say, who weren't even mid-Atlantic. Like they wanted you to sound British.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just horrible. And I tell my students all the time, because some of them, particularly the ones who've never done Shakespeare before, would start doing Shakespeare, and all of a sudden this British thing comes out of them, and I'm like, stop. What? Just talk. And as I say to them all the time, the correct accent to do Shakespeare in is your accent.
Yeah. Whatever
Whatever your accent is, that's the he played at the Globe. It's that idea of like everybody right can have ownership of him. And so I just think it's such a huge positive change.
Yeah, and even seeing stuff. I know you do a lot of traveling when we could travel, and when you're over, in England, where all those great Shakespearean companies, the RSC, the National, etc., they're really embracing the music of the Isles themselves. So wherever you're coming from, finding the music in your own accent versus being told your accent doesn't have music, but this one does, right?
Oh, yes. I saw a wonderful production of Hamlet on video recently. I'm pretty sure it was the RSC, taking place in the Caribbean, and just wonderful actors, and it just gave the language such a completely different feel in a wonderful way. The lilts. I just think it's a wonderful development.
And you have performed Shakespeare in Spanish before, correct?
Yes, but not in Latin America, just in the United States. Yes, I've done different versions of different plays. Some online, some. I did a show in La Jolla in Spanish. So yeah. I mean, it's we were chatting about this weird thing about Shakespeare, that he works even in other languages, and when I kind of think about why I respond to Shakespeare so much and why I love it so much, I used to think, well, it's the language. It's got to be the language is so beautiful, and it's you and I can go on for days about how much we love the language, but obviously, it's not just the language, right? Because it works when it's translated, and certainly a couple of the translations I used were not particularly good translations. So it's not the language, really. It's not. We talked about it's not the plot. Shakespeare had very little interest in plot, or maybe just not enough time. So he would always steal plots from everyone else, and whenever and wherever he could, with both hands, stealing plots. And it's funny, the one play where he didn't have a strong source material is The Tempest, really. And if you look at that play, there really is no plot. Everything happens before the play, really.
And who you'll be playing?
Antonio, the evil Antonio.
Okay, good.
My second time doing it. I did.
But actually, in The Tempest, interestingly, right? It's one place we know. This is another kind of stupid Shakespeare trivia fact that he actually basically plagiarized completely Gonzalo's speech about where it's from, right from Montaigne, right? The cannibal thing, right? Where he does he almost takes it from the Florio translation of the thing. It's almost word for word a lot.
Yeah. But not the plot. Just
just this one section.
Pieces of text. Yeah, master of cutting and pasting. Sometimes.
Oh yeah. Imagine what he would have done today with Microsoft Word.
Right. So. Not the plots, not the language. So it's the characters, it's these characters that somehow, even when you perform them in a different language, they come through this just massively complex characters, psychology, the whole invention of the human, Harold Bloom. Yeah. I mean, as much as I disagree with a lot of things in that book, the principal idea that he invented psychology,
or the way we look at ourselves,
is I think absolutely true. And so it's the characters, which is great for us actors, because that's what we play.
Well, let's John, if you could bring up that video. This is a short thing I want to play to your point here, Remo.
Yeah.
This is from Birmingham Public Library, where they're doing this series, and there's these short videos they've created of Birmingham, citizens of Birmingham of all ages, doing Shakespeare in their own language. There's 93 languages spoken in Birmingham, and this is this project that I will encourage you, after you see it, to check it out. Go online. There's a great article in the Guardian of it for anybody watching, where they're embracing. Birmingham Public Library in England has apparently the largest collection of Shakespeareana in all of for public libraries.
Amazing.
And they're embracing it in every language that's spoken within Birmingham, which is 93, which sounds like a lot, but our communities are far more diverse than often we think they are. Correct?
Yeah.
And this, and we're just going to watch about a minute of this, and you'll see a bunch of different short speeches. Not in only one of which will be in English, and ironically, I love it. It's the only one that's subtitled in the thing too. So if you're out there. Remo, you'll see it. You tell me if you can recognize any of these speeches. I think I recognize two of them.
Okay, that's good. I like the quiz.
But I'm guessing because my French is really, really terrible. So I think I picked it out after watching it about 3 times. But just to hear the music of Shakespeare and people embracing him and that democratic thing you're talking about in him inventing the human. John, can you bring that up?
Πότε μύρια λεπτά λαλούμενα σιγοκελαηδούν στα αυτιά μου. Πότε φωνές και σε ξύπνησα από τον πολύ ύπνο με κάνουν και αποκοιμιέμαι. Και πότε της υπνοφαντασίας μου τα νέφη φαίνοντέ μου σκίζονται.
Galoppate veloci cavalli dai piedi di fuoco alla dimora di Febo. Un cocchiere come Fetonte vi spingerebbe a colpi di frusta verso ovest e introdurrebbe subito l'ombrosa notte.
Deze slikkok diesen igen vis nis kan Afrikaan.
Now is the winter of our discontent. Made glorious summer by this son of York. And all the clouds that loud upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried.
Nicht alles muss zeigen und manches verschwiegen, nicht alles liegen.
Na ou dar dain, na ou dar lain.
Dames et toi, je suis au-dessus de toi. Mais n'aie pas peur de la grandeur. Il y a ceux qui sont nés grands, certains qui atteignent la grandeur, et certains d'autres la grandeur qui leur est imposée.
That's amazing. That's wonderful.
And ironically, right, for me, and maybe it's just the guy who's delivering the Richard III speech. Right. It's like the one with the least music is the guy doing it in English, right? Yeah.
I think there was the Gallop Apace.
That was the first one, right?
Yeah.
Gallop Apace. I thought that. I was like, I know you'll get that one.
Yeah.
But then I think the French guy at the end is doing, I think that's Malvolio, greatness. I think that's,
I think so.
Yeah, the greatness speech about greatness thrust upon you from Twelfth Night.
Yeah. I think there was someone doing some German that I didn't quite get.
Yeah, there was the woman in there. I'm not even sure which language she was speaking, but I think I caught enough that it was maybe a French influenced African language. I'm not sure, but it sounded like it might be Quality of Mercy.
Wow!
I just picked out something. Maybe, but I have no idea. But anyway,
that's amazing.
It is.
It's amazing. And I think I was telling you, I had the great opportunity in the many years I worked at ART to tour a lot with shows, and wherever we would tour, I would make it a point to go see Shakespeare. I went to Moscow and China and Taiwan and Europe, and we were at the, so it was just, again, it worked.
Right.
It worked, and it translated, and you could see in the audiences that they responded to these characters, and as I told you, I happened to be a part of a tour in London during the Olympics, where they
2012,
did, where they brought in all the different companies from all over the world. So bringing, what is it, coal to Newcastle, where you bring Shakespeare done in all these languages, and it was a huge success. It's just a wonderful thing. And I think the reason people say this all the time about Shakespeare, that sort of we have our umbilical cord to him is always there, right? Even today.
Absolutely.
And this idea that everyone, regardless of language, can get something out of him. And I think that was because that's the way these plays were written. They were intended to be appeal to everyone because quite practically he needed to fill 3,000 seats every performance.
Yeah.
And he couldn't afford to just write for the groundlings, the sort of illiterates.
Right.
He had to appeal to them, and he had to appeal to everyone up to the Queen Elizabeth and later King James, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And everyone in between. So he had that in his DNA, this ability to appeal to everyone, and I don't think I guess it is sort of a coincidence that the plays were done at the Globe.
Yeah.
But it's a good coincidence.
Yeah. It's he, like, those of us who are, do this for a living and care about the history of our form, and we always go back to the, Shakespeare and Moliere tend to tower above us, and as two of the greatest, maybe the two greatest playwrights, right? And then you go, well, what do they have in common? They both were actors, right? Yeah. They both were men of the theater, meaning they were producers. They had to create, they had to make their rent, they had to do that. They had company members, surviving off of these jobs. I mean, these were real, and they were constantly talk about how often. I've been reading a lot, of course, during the pandemic about how often the theaters were shut down because of plague. So we're going through one of these periods now with this 10-month kind of interregnum, as it were, which was nothing in that. They were constantly being shut down, and then get out on the road and go tour up somewhere where the plague hasn't been ravaging. If whoever could survive, so these were the same kinds of things that we're working with, in our own, that they were dealing with, and he was able to. And I think you're right. You come back to that insight is so great that the plots are wonderful and wild and crazy, but borrowed. So people would know them. They were familiar for the most part. The language, gorgeous. Incredible poetry can be broken down. We can study it as literature, but ultimately the connection is with the character, right? The people. I see that, like, look, there's the guy. I know that guy, or I know her, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, and they're so iconic. And again, even if you've never seen the plays, well, when you think of Young Love, Romeo and Juliet, Ambition, Macbeth, or Richard III, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Old age, senility. King Lear. Jealousy. Yeah, I mean, even to this day, I was talking to who was, I can't even remember who it was, but someone who's never seen Shakespeare before. It was the parent of a student. That's who it was, and we were talking about because the student was in my Shakespeare class, and at some point he started talking about jealousy and this and that, and he said, like Othello. And I said, oh, you've seen Othello? He goes, no, but I know it's about jealousy. I mean, it's that kind of these characters just transcend beyond. So it's always such a huge responsibility when you take them on, because they're just so titanic.
Well, there's that thing that see, people will ask us, right? Why is Shakespeare? Why Shakespeare? Why Shakespeare?
Right.
Why him and not everybody? And you go, it's also not only a genius, right, and an ability, an artistic ability, but timing is everything in the world. We know this,
right?
And so coming up, in the English Renaissance, a period in which all of this starts to flower, is in this incredible kind of hinge moment between the late medieval and what we call the early modern, right? And I would contend, along maybe with Harold Bloom's invention of the human, that when we talk in terms of in our theater of realism and naturalism, and realism being the kind of thing that changed the theater in the late 19th century, because human psychology was kind of put in the forefront, right? The complexity of the human psychology versus kind of proclamation and melodrama and all those other things, and you go, that wasn't the late 19th century. That was 1590. That was 1600.
Yes.
On the South Bank. That when that kid comes walking out and looks at the audience and says, "Should I kill myself?" You know what I mean?
Right.
You go. Right. People go, "Oh, Jesus, yeah, this is what I think." There's all of a sudden this interiority happens, and that's character, right? That's like people going, "That's how I feel." Right.
Well, that's the soliloquies. And again, soliloquies are the monologues when a character is alone or perceives that he or she is alone.
Right.
And that would have been direct address
to the
audience, right? and it's always someone trying to solve a problem of some sort, and they can't talk to anyone in the world of the play, so they turn to the audience and they confide in us and make us implicit, or complicit, I guess, in whatever their issue is. But that's all psychology, right? They're telling us what's going on in their brain, right. and you can hold me to this, but I'm pretty sure this is true. That every time a character addresses the audience, they tell the truth. They never lie to the audience, right? So it's that idea of sharing, and to me, so you can say, well, it was practical because there was no electricity. You couldn't plunge the audience into darkness, so you have to deal with them, right? You have to acknowledge them. But to me, that is the essence of theater.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's what makes theater different from anything else, is this connection with the audience. The fact that we're all together in this space with the actors, breathing the same air and having a singular experience that will never be repeated. Because even if we do the same show the next night, it's a new experience. You know, the next night's audience is not paying for a warmed over version of something that has happened before. They want that singular experience. So I always say, you know, we're sort of at an inflection point right now with this pandemic. And I was thinking about this the other day, you know, that we can either, you hear people go, I can't wait until this is over so we can go back to normal. And I think it should be the opposite, right? We want to go back to the way things were, or we want to take what's happened now and change, you know, and move forward. And I think, you know, if you think about the, you know, Black Lives Matter movement or education, anything, that this should be a moment to, as with Shakespeare, where things change, you know, moving forward, rather than, okay, now we can all sort of do what we used to do. Let's go back to what we, no, let's learn from this nightmare, you know, and with theater, I think there's a great opportunity, right? Because I think for the longest time, theater has been chasing, trying to outreel film and television. And I think the only way theater is going to survive is if we embrace what film and television can't do.
Right.
Again, this Shakespeare, right?
Right.
Which is what can't they do? We're in front of an audience. We're in front of live people.
Sharing. You just said it the best, I think, which is breathing the same air. You know.
Yeah. And so I think, I think if we try to, we're never going to be as real as film and television. So you have to embrace theatricality. And I think sometimes when people say theatrical, it's gotten a negative connotation. But to me, something that is theatrical is wonderful. You know,
it's
a wonderful thing.
You know, we don't pay. We want it to be, it's got to be larger than life. You know, it's got to be, you know, we've only got 2 hours traffic to put an entire kind of epic story together. So you know, this silly metaphor I use with my students a lot, it's like orange juice concentrate, you know, before you add the water in, you know what I mean? You suck all the water out and you just, it has to explode in front of us. And the one thing, right, we don't want to go back to normal, though we do want to, the one thing we can't do that we do have to get back to, unfortunately, that we can't, is that formally we can't breathe the same air, right? That's the one thing right now that's preventing us from taking forward, you know, because you're absolutely right. Getting back to, and you're right. And that actor coming down center stage, he or she looking out at the audience and talking to the audience,
right?
You know, where they never lie. He famously, right? Iago does nothing but lie, except when he talks to the audience.
Right. And when he lies, we have ample warning that he's lying, right? And again, we're made complicit.
And we're made complicit in
those lies. Absolutely.
Where else do you get that? Oh,
yeah, exactly. But so yeah, and again, he just, you know, I know when two Shakespeare nerds start talking about Shakespeare, I know sometimes people roll their eyes, but it's like, how did he have that insight? You know, that you know, let us on your imaginary forces work, right? So, hey guys, you're gonna have to work. It's a partnership here. Yeah. We can only do but so much, but you know, we can't bring the vasty fields of France on stage. So when we talk of horses, think you that you see them, right? and it's that's the thing that I think we need to embrace. That thing where, if I say, "Oh, there's a river here," and I bring out a blue fabric, everyone buys that.
It's a river. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Television and film, if someone did that, you'd be like, why is that person bringing out a blue fabric?
Like it.
Why can't you just film this by a river?
Go down to the brook.
Right? And so it's that thing that I think is going to make theater ultimately survive if we embrace it rather than, again, try to chase what film and television do. And I think because we've spent all this time just looking at screens, I think we're craving.
Oh, absolutely.
We're craving that other experience.
And so we want to, jump into some text now. We were talking, we wanted to do this to look at just what you're talking about. There's a couple pieces we're going to look at here. Both roles that you have played. The first of which is Clarence from Richard III.
Right.
You did recently with Commonwealth Shakespeare a couple seasons ago.
Yes, sir.
And then we're going to jump backwards a little bit for a play you were just quoting, Henry V.
Yes.
And Mistress Quickly, which was, that you played 20, as I said, I saw it 25 years ago now or so at the ART.
Yeah, in the 90s. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And a speech about the death of Falstaff, the great character from Henry IV's Part 1 and 2, who there it is there, right?
Yeah, that
picture.
That was him.
There you go. Yeah.
Jeremy Guy, who so we did the whole Henry ad, the 3 Henry plays. Yeah. And Falstaff doesn't appear in Henry V. So poor Jeremy just had to come in to just lay in a coffin. And that was basically his whole job during the Henry V performance.
But yeah, I don't know if, there you go. You're back.
Yeah.
So Jeremy came back from the coffin, but he was getting paid. It was all good. The easiest job he ever had in his life.
He just sat in the dressing room and told stories.
Yeah.
That's it.
So this first speech, now just a little bit of background. This is at the top of the play. Clarence is Richard's brother.
Right.
And what do we need to know to make sense of what's happening here?
I think what you need to know is that, Richard obviously, and he's referred to as Gloucester in the speech, but that's Richard III, right, his brother, is trying to get rid of everyone who stands between him and the throne.
He's not Richard III yet, right?
No, that's right. His other brother is the king.
Yeah.
But he's got plans, and one of the plans is to get rid of Clarence, right? The part that I was playing. And so through some machinations, he ends up having Clarence imprisoned in the tower. And so this speech is Clarence is in the tower, and he just woke up from this horrible nightmare. And I guess the other thing you have to know that's important is that Clarence is very gullible, and he doesn't see how manipulative and evil his brother is.
Yeah.
So he has no idea that actually it's through Richard's machinations that he's ended up as a prisoner in the tower.
Yeah, and what we'll just hear this. This isn't the whole speech. This is a very long scene.
Yeah,
it's mostly Clarence with the keeper of the tower, and where he goes on after this. But we're going to look at the beginning of it, and his premonition of what's to come. And then we're going to compare it with a Mistress Quickly speech, which is in prose. So what we haven't talked about yet a lot on the show is prose, and what the difference is between prose and verse, and what an actor might do when they kind of encounter these two different forms of language in order to best access them and make them clear to an audience. But they also share something, these speeches, and I'm glad it's this one, they share the same actor, but Remo has great virtuosity. He can do anything. But it's also, they share a kind of a deep present tense kind of working through of pain and a gentleness of and a kind of inner beauty in these two speeches that I want to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
So John, if you could bring up the Clarence speech, and let's let Remo take and I'll just give you that cue there, Reem. The keeper says, because this is important for what is to come. What was your dream, my lord? I pray you tell me.
Methought that I had broken from the tower, and was embarked to cross to Burgundy. And in my company my brother Gloucester, who from my cabin tempted me to walk upon the hatches. Thence we looked toward England, and sighted up 1,000 heavy times during the wars of York and Lancaster that had befallen us. As we paced along upon the giddy footing of the hatches, methought that Gloucester stumbled, and in falling struck me that thought to stay him overboard into the tumbling billows of the main. O Lord, methought, what pain it was to drown, what dreadful noise of waters in my ears, what sights of ugly death within mine eyes. Methought I saw 1,000 fearful wrecks, 1,000 men that fishes gnawed upon. Wedges of gold, great anchors, heaps of pearl, inestimable stones, unvalued jewels, all scattered in the bottom of the sea. Some lay in dead men's skulls, and in the holes where eyes did once inhabit, there were crept as 'twere in scorn of eyes, reflecting gems that wooed the slimy bottom of the deep, and mocked the dead bones that lay scattered by.
Wow. Wonderful.
Such a great piece.
Yeah, such a rich speech.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And it's only the beginning, then he actually he actually dies and ends up in hell, and and all the people that he did bad things to come back and make him feel extraordinarily guilty. And well, that spoken so beautifully too, and I think we'll it's so great to see it I hope it's great for people watching to see the text, yes,
and so we can kind of watch you make your way through it. What you do so naturally and so beautifully. And I know you've played the part, but you haven't looked at this in a while, and it probably wasn't exactly the same. Might have been edited a little bit when you guys did it.
We changed two things.
Yeah,
we didn't cut anything. We just changed two things. So this is an interesting thing to talk about, right? So into the tumbling billows of the main.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, are people going to know what the main is? The main is the sea, the open sea. So I said, why don't we just say sea? Again, it doesn't change the iambic at all. It doesn't change and I just, again, even though I love Shakespeare, I think our job as actors is to bring people on board, right? And any opportunity that you have to make it a little bit more understandable, I think you should take, as long as it doesn't in any way, undo what Shakespeare wants to do. So changing that, and then we changed methought I saw 1,000 fearful wrecks to wrecks, make sure that
the same thing.
Wrecks.
Yeah. Those.
The other thing, if I can say, Tony, sorry, but it's bringing back all the memories about the conversations we had, who from my cabin tempted me to walk upon the hatches. Now, hatches is not something that I think a modern audience would necessarily understand, but it's like the planks, right? The planks, the loose planks. Yeah. And so I remember, again, this is something as an actor that I think is important, is that, again, you're the medium between Shakespeare and the audience. And so I remember that was the only time in the speech where I did a little kind of movement, right? Just, again, we hate the word illustrating, but just to show what it is that and I think it helps the audience understand that we're talking about a ship that has very loose planks.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, I had a student in class on Wednesday working on a speech from Henry V, the one you were quoting earlier.
Yeah.
The chorus speech.
Right.
And she got to think you, when we speak of horses, that you see them. You just said that. And the next line is, printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth. Right. And she was kind of telling a story, and she made the thing, the gallop on her knee. She went printing their proud, and it was lovely. It was just like, it was wonderful, because it just like, that's exactly what the language is doing. She was having fun. She was drawing the audience into it. And it's like, absolutely,
absolutely. And again, if you can choose those moments when you do that, when it will help the audience understand the language, then that's golden, right?
It's gold.
It's great. I mean, you don't want it to evolve into what is it, storybook theater or children's
Yeah.
theater, where you're illustrating everything. But
Everything, no.
you don't need to, because most of this language is pretty clear, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say too, I mean, John, can you bring that back up for a second? I want to just point something out. Like this will come up when we look at the prose. You spoke to so beautifully, honoring the verse line and phrasing with the verse line, meaning in these chunks of iambic, like 5 feet at a time, right? And it really helps my ear. You almost never ran through a thought. It was when you did, it was clear and it was intentional. But if we look at these line endings, which we won't be able to do in the prose, this is always an interesting exercise. And I was just looking at this earlier, and I'm like, let's just look down. If we just read the last word of every line: Tower, Burgundy, Gloucester, Walk, England, Times, Lancaster, along, hatches, falling overboard, main, drown, ears, eyes, racks, upon, pearl, jewels, sea, holes, crept, reflecting gems, the deep scattered by.
Yes.
That energy at the end of every line, you almost reads like, Barry Edelstein always encourages this. Do that, and you almost get the spine of the speech by just reading the line endings.
Absolutely, and that's where the energy of the line needs to be headed, is to that last line, right? Because that last line tells so much of. Again, if you think about the material, it's always moving forward. It's never stays still. It's always. The I am, right? So the basic foot in Shakespeare is tatam. So unstressed, stressed, right? So you're moving forward. The second part of a line is always more important than the first part of a line. And that last word is always the most important. So he's always moving like a shark, and as an actor, that's great. But it's challenging, right? Because you always have, as an actor, I think of it almost as arrows. I hope this will make sense to people. You have an arrow going this way, which is the momentum, the propulsion forward, right? And then you have an arrow going this way, which is you have to honor each moment and be present for each moment. And that's the tension in acting, right? Is that you have to always keep moving it, but you also have to honor every single moment, right? So if this arrow is too prominent, then the audience feels like we're not moving forward. If this arrow is prominent, then it feels like we're rushing through the text. And so it's always that balance between those two, and then Shakespeare works beautifully. And that's true of anything, not even just Shakespeare.
Right.
But yes, this idea of moving forward. So for me, the challenge always is, and I don't know if you noticed it, but I'm very much a person who believes that you have to hear the difference between verse and prose.
Absolutely.
Right? Because there's a reason why he switches between verse and prose. And a lot of teachers will say, well, just follow the thought in the verse line and you'll be fine. Well, no, that's prose. Then you're turning verse into prose, right? Yes, of course, it's important to follow the thought, but it has to sound differently from just prose. And so the Peter Hall idea, Jeremy Geit, who's one of my people that I learned a lot about Shakespeare, and Alvin Epstein too.
Sure.
Both of them were really clear that there needed to be a breath. Not always a big breath. It could be a catch breath right at the end of that important word.
Right.
At the end of the verse line. So that just a little breath, a little something that delineates that this is verse. And the great thing about that, Tony, is that then you don't worry about running out of breath at all, because you always have the opportunity, and you can really just go for it on that last line of the verse line, because you can breathe right after it. And so you can really honor that power of that last word. And this is why I think, again, inside baseball, I think when we talk about memorizing, we always say, did you memorize your lines? Did you remember your lines? We don't say, did you remember your words? We don't say, did you remember your sentences?
Right.
We say, do you remember your lines? And I think that goes back to Shakespeare, where you had to know your lines. You had to know where that line ending was, because that's your opportunity to breathe.
Yeah.
And a lot of young students, when I work with them, I say, well, where's the verse line end there? And they don't know, because they've just memorized the thought.
Right. And it's really hard to pull it apart. Of course, we're humans, so we tend to kind of go thought by thought and creating.
Sure.
And oftentimes he'll run thoughts together. You know, probably half the time they run together, half the time they're end stopped, right? The end stopped ones are easy for us as actors to navigate a little bit easier because there's a natural comma or a period.
Correct.
And the run-on thoughts. But if we take that, if we honor that, and if we don't, if we choose not to, we do it for a very specific reason.
Right. And again, we talked about this, right? Yeah, I think the idea is, for example, we call it an enjambed line,
right.
Sometimes, as we paced along upon the giddy footing of the hatches, right? So the thought continues. So I think the instinct is to continue that thought, but then you want to honor the verse at the same time. So that's when you would do, on an enjambed line, meaning a line where we don't have punctuation, a catch breath.
Yeah.
So that I would say, as we paced along upon the giddy, but you see how the breath kind of activates the text? As we paced along upon the giddy footing of the hatches, methought that Gloucester stumbled, and in falling struck me. Yeah, see, that's an enjambed line, but to me, there's a breath there, because he's like,
what happened?
What happened, right? And the interesting thing about this beginning part is that he's using all this language where it's almost like his subconscious is telling him, don't trust your brother.
Right.
Because look at the words, who from my cabin tempted me to walk upon the hatches.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then he struck me that thought to stay him, meaning he hit me, and I was trying to help him because he as he's famously disabled, right? And all of a sudden, but he struck me over. So it's almost like down deep inside, he knows.
Yeah.
He knows.
And he's fighting with that knowledge that he doesn't want to admit to himself, right?
Yes.
And there it is, like what you're doing formally, that Shakespeare's written in. It's our job as actors to make, find the reason why, find the psychological reason why we do it. And so you just did it beautifully. I think, many teachers, Barry Edelstein in his great book will talk about, like, you ask yourself a little question in that catch breath. You're like, why? And then it comes to you. And it's also enforces us to be in the present tense constantly. And it allows the audience, in your great illustration of the forward motion versus the downward pressure, to stay with us and not get ahead or behind us, right? That 5 foot 10 syllable line is just the right piece of information for me to give me a microsecond, and I can get to the next one,
Yeah. And also, yes, absolutely. And again, how did he know that?
Yeah.
How did he know that that's how much stuff we can process? And also how much stuff we can say before we need another breath. I've read studies where people say, usually people 10 or 11 syllables, you need to take a breath.
To breathe,
And it's funny because we go back, and drama schools for the longest time, Jeremy would talk about this all the time, where they would spend hours and hours training themselves to be able to do 6, 7 lines
at a
on
time.
one breath.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous, because no one in the history of mankind has ever spoken, 6 or 7 lines in one breath. There would be no reason to do that.
Just to show off.
Right. It became, that's what it became.
Yeah.
It became like showing off. And Gielgud,
and you needed to be wanted to, well, Gielgud could do 12 lines.
Of course. And it became kind of a badge of courage, right? But again, the amazing thing, and again, I could talk for hours about this, so stop me. But again, the fact that, so the I am, the rhythm we haven't really talked about is the heartbeat, as you said, right? Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And then we have this breath at the end. So to me, that idea that the heartbeat would have been this natural, it's the first sound we hear.
Yeah.
Our mother's heartbeat, if you stop to think about it, right? It's so ingrained in us. So the two things that keep us alive, our heart and breathing, are the fundamental of parts of a Shakespearean line.
Mm.
It's amazing, right? I mean, it's just
it's so great. Remo, I want to take a class with you. Do you have any room in that I can come in and audit your class? Because
you're welcome. You know more than I do. So
no, man, I'm learning. This is great. This is so great. I'm going to be quoting you I'm teaching this afternoon Shakespeare. I'm going to be quoting you. So we're kind of getting towards the end here. So I want to quickly look at Mistress Quickly, which is now that we've kind of explored the whys and wherefores around the verse, now we're dealing with something that doesn't have that form, which is incumbent upon the actor to provide the thought beats, the thing, in a sense, and doesn't have the verse to rely on. So let's just look at the speech quickly. Take us through it. Just to give it a little bit of background, Falstaff has died. And you, Mistress Quickly, who is a friend who runs the tavern in Eastcheap, the Boar's Head, and is mainly a comic figure throughout these stories until now. And where she is relating to the audience, of course, but to Pistol and Bardot and Nym and the boy, that Falstaff has just died in the room upstairs, right?
Right.
So let's bring that up, John. And so Bardot says, "Would I were with him wheresoe'er he is, either in heaven or in hell."
Are you sure he's not in hell? He's in Arthur's bosom, if ever man went to Arthur's bosom. He made a finer end and went away, and it had been any christened child. He parted e'en between 12 and 1, e'en at the turning of the tide. For after I saw him fumble with the sheets, and play with flowers, and smile upon his finger's end, I knew there was but one way. For his nose was as sharp as a pen, and he talked of green fields. "How now, Sir John," quoth I, "what man, be of good cheer." So he cried out, "God, God, God," 3 or 4 times. Now I, to comfort him, bid him he should not think of God. I hope there was no need to trouble himself with any such thoughts yet. So he bade me lay more clothes on his feet. I put my hand into the bed and felt them, and they were as cold as any stone. And I felt to his knees, so upward, and all was as cold as any stone.
Great. That's beautiful. I mean, that's what a
So
speech.
again, sorry, Tony.
No, please.
So the main difference, verse, the basic building block of verse is the line. The verse line, right?
Yep.
The basic building block of prose is the sentence.
It's the sentence. Yep.
Right? So that's your opportunity to breathe.
Yep.
So you want to keep the sentence going. Sometimes the sentences are very long and you might need a catch breath. But the main idea is that in prose, you go with the sentence, with the thought, and in verse, you go with the line. If you can. And I think I think the audience hears the difference, and I think that's very important because Shakespeare wanted the audience to hear when we switched from prose to verse and vice versa.
And I think, there's naturalistic verse, right? And then there's heightened verse. Clearly, the speech the Clarence speech is a heightened piece of verse filled with metaphor, simile, figurative and imaginative language, rich kind of assonance and sonority and all of those things. And then there's this, and Shakespeare loves to play with both of them at the same time in the same speech, and which is a great clue for us as actors. And here, it's not that anything that Mistress Quickly is telling us is less profound, right, than what Clarence is talking about. She's not using the same poetic figures, right? Because she's not maybe capable of that in her own, but she's certainly dealing emotionally with something as deeply moving as Clarence is.
Absolutely. And exactly. So, and again, he writes for the character, right? He's so amazing in the way and prose helps students often ask me, well, when does he use prose? When does he use verse? It depends.
Right.
it again, as with any creative genius,
Yeah.
every time you make a dogmatic statement about him, the next play he writes, he completely changes the rules.
Well, and
right?
John, thank you for bringing that up. You can see on the screen, just so for people who like asking the question Remo saying the students were asking, is you can see the difference too. You can see the verse line versus the sentence, right?
Right.
One looks like poetry, the other, traditional poetry. The other one looks like it could be written in a newspaper, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so in the Henriade, in the Henry plays, I think it's pretty clear what the difference is. The lower classes, the common folk speak in prose. Falstaff speaks in prose.
Prose, right.
And the nobility, the king, the royalty speak in verse. And of course, the great thing is Henry, before he, Hal, before he becomes Henry V, speaks in prose when he speaks
with them, and then
and then he adopts verse.
He adopts, right.
So in this world, in the world of this play, prose is very much a class.
Absolutely.
A class thing. The other thing that's interesting about both these speeches is that they're what I call passive speeches, meaning you are telling a story that happened. So it's not a speech where you're trying to figure something out, like a soliloquy. You're telling a story,
right?
So both Clarence is telling what happened in his dream, and she is describing what happened with Falstaff's death. So the trap there is that it just becomes kind of
a memory.
Yes. So in both those cases, the way he writes it, the person is actually reliving what this, in Clarence's case,
right,
the dream, in her case, the death.
So, trying to figure out what it means, right?
Yes,
becomes the action, right? Where you sit there and you go, what does it mean that this happened to me? And until we put it into words, it's not real.
And this is the first, great point.
Yeah.
And think about it, right? This is the first time both of these characters have put it into words.
Yeah.
Because it's just happened.
And one little thing that I just love that, and it doesn't mean you played it so beautifully, but you can imagine in the scene as Mistress Quickly is relating to the clowns, right? The idiots at the bar. I mean, they're people and they love Falstaff, so it's very deeply emotional. But there's kind of a dirty joke at the end too, right? It's like she's reaching under the sheet and she's going. Yeah, it's so great. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, that's her even though it's unusual. Yeah. It's her character. What's her character? Her character is that she's bawdy.
Yeah.
And so at the very end, we have this, she was feeling up his leg and everything was cold, right? Even his penis was cold.
Yeah.
But again, you can't play, you still have to play. Like, I think she's sad that his penis was cold.
Absolutely.
Because that penis has given her a lot of pleasure. Right?
So it's for Pistol and Bardot to laugh at that, right? Exactly. That's for them to go.
Right. But you don't want to comment because it is in her experience. And also, so this is amazing, right? Because again, it's Mistress Quickly. The audience would know that this is a comic character. So he even starts with a joke, which is what's her identity. She's bawdy and she's full of malaprops. Like she kind of gets everything mixed up. So when she talks about Arthur's bosom, it's Abraham's bosom.
Right? She doesn't even know right from the beginning.
Right. And so Abraham's bosom, which is where people, when they died, good Christians would go into Abraham's bosom.
Yeah.
Right. But she misremembers it. So that's interesting, right? Because again, Shakespeare's audience would have understood that and gotten that joke. The Bible is not, I don't think, as well as universally known now. So you kind of have to help that joke if you want that joke there. So, I mean, what I try to do was kind of put a little air before Arthur's bosom, like she's trying to remember.
Who was it?
Like, no, sure, he's not in hell.
And then Arthur is interesting too, because then it becomes the national myth, right? The King Arthur myth. It becomes Falstaff becomes part of something for an audience that he desperately wants. To get on the side of, like, you could see them during, like, once more into the breach being like, let's go kill the French, what I mean? So,
exactly. So that's, So again, she starts, again, it's the character doesn't go out the window, right? The character still gets things mixed up and still concerned about bawdy stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but incredibly touching as well.
Yeah. And I love, that. So, I mean, we're kind of going overtime, which is fine because this has been like I said, I if anybody, if your classes haven't been registered yet for this semester, if anybody watches this, you're going to get a lot more people coming in. I want to work with that guy.
We're already in the middle of it, but yeah. Summer.
Yeah.
I teach them forever. So
yeah. But so Reem, this was amazing, and I hope for anybody watching out there that looking at the forms of Shakespeare's language helps you to kind of understand some of the what he's doing to help an audience, and it's all there just for the actor, again, as Remo was pointing out, to interpret for you, to make it clear, to make the story work, and ultimately make the character, right, as rich, as detailed, as specific as we are in the audience, and making that connection, right? And that's why it works in English, that's why it works in Spanish, that's why it works in Swahili, that's why it works in any language you can think of. I would encourage anybody who's interested to check out that Birmingham thing. There's a great link to it on The Guardian. They have a website with the links to the videos if you're interested. Otherwise, we're going to end here now. This was amazing, Remo. We could go on, as you said, for hours and hours and hours. I am.
Next time we do a play together.
Exactly, the president of your fan club, and looking forward to that when we get to see you on stage this summer at Tempest. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. One way or another, we'll get to see that. And otherwise, my friend, thank you so much. Stay safe. Get the vaccine as soon as you can. And let's get back into the rehearsal hall, yeah?
Yeah, you as well, my friend. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Reem.